Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Not sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s. During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried communicating that he isn't Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night they would take about 5 people from the cage and slaughter them in front of him. After the 3rd night, he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my dad spoke, and told him that he's not Rwandan and showed him his ID. Somehow that guy got him out and he was handed the keys to his truck and was on his way. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, saw a woman with a awesomest trunchbull bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks Osaduck this and plans to pull into the next services to report us, even if it's nothing misunderstanding. Better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details. Plate CTC, and he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, same mistrunchable hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window. So my dad pulls over into a lay-by and calls the police. Apparently they have received 3 other calls about the same woman car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late night, on a 2-lane road through the Everglades, and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5-10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They get back on the road and drive another few minutes and come across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following. He said there are multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a new story about it to confirm. Probably would have been in 2005-ish. They most likely would have been involved if not for that random DJ on the only radio station to come in that night. Driving through an abandoned section of Baltimore at 3 in the morning. My CB radio turned itself on and crackled for a bit. Out of nowhere some voice over the radio said in a deep southern drawl, "I ain't got no panties on." I could see up and down the interstate for miles and saw not one set of headlights. Not technically a truck driver, but I used to work as a field technician in the oil industry, so I spent a lot of time driving through remote areas of Canada at odd hours. One very strange and eerie experience sticks with me. I was in either northeast BC or northwest Alberta, can't remember the exact location, driving late at night, when I noticed a very large black shape on the road in front of me. Thinking it was a moose, I stepped on the brakes, coming to a stop only a few feet from it. Despite being so close, and having my headlights shining directly on it, I still couldn't tell what I was looking at. It was vaguely the shape of a 4-legged animal, but very big, probably about 6 feet tall. Aside from that it was completely featureless. I couldn't make out any details whatsoever. No shine from its eyes. Nothing. And then I noticed there were more of them in the ditch on both sides of the road. 5 or 6. Or maybe more. all the same as the black shape on the road in front of me. None of them were moving. They didn't look like physical objects or living things. More like just large patches of absolute darkness. After I got over my shock, dread started to set in, and I drove around the thing on the road and sped off. I don't really believe this was a paranormal experience. I had been driving for 8+ hours through the middle of the night, and I was exhausted. Most likely, it was a hallucination caused by lack of sleep and spending too long staring straight ahead into the dark, but it was still a very unsettling experience. A good buddy of mine is a long-haul trucker for my company. A few months ago, he woke up in a parking lot surrounded by police. Some dude had gotten shot and dumped 15 feet from his truck. Literally reposting my comment from another thread just like this. I work for a railroad. Not necessarily remote, but sometimes it's just a conductor and engineer cruising along ±10 mph on very isolated, fairly wooded track. I've heard a few older guys mention something about a family, or a man with a suitcase. Something along those lines, don't really remember. Walking down the track with no concerns. Constant blowing of the horn. Flashing of the lights etc, just kept walking down the track. Then disappearing. Near Weatherly, PA. I also experienced a pretty intense trip myself one night coming home from New Jersey. Saw my first dead body laying along the rail, which in itself was kinda interesting. Then the only other part of my trip where we were required to run at a slow speed. I heard the craziest blood-curdling scream I have ever heard in my entire life. One of the nights I will probably remember until I retire. FedEx contractor. I'm in one of those big box trucks. Anyways, I finished a long delivery day, and I swear to whatever ducking gods you believe in that I was hearing voices in my cab. It wasn't the radio. It wasn't my tinnitus. It wasn't my subconscious. I was hearing whispered voices in my right ear that were coming from the passenger's seat. The voices continued even after I had gotten back to my hub, clocked out, and hopped in my own car to go home. They only stopped when I left the parking lot. It only happened that night. I still have no ducking idea what the hell it was because I had ruled everything else out. I'm not a truck driver, but the story is from a truck driver. I was working the overnight shift from Friday night into Saturday morning at a gas station. At about 6 AM a semi pulls into the fuel aisle. Driver gets out and almost runs into the store, clearly shaken. His face is completely white and he is obviously upset. My first thought was the poor man had hit someone on the road. We get a lot of drunks walking across a 4-lane highway in front of the store. So I ask what's wrong. He looks at me for a second and is like, I'm not crazy. Now I'm thinking, great, I'm here all alone and this guy is losing it. I say of course not. I just saw something huge on the side of the road. Like a deer or bear. We had a bear get in the dumpster last week. No bigger than a bear on its back legs. Maybe a big person. It picked up a dead buck on the side of the road and carried it over its shoulder into the woods. I can only stare at him. My brain cannot deal with this information this late in a shift. A local comes up to the counter to get his usual and the guy tells him the story. The local says, "That's the Bigfoot that lives near the county line." The truck driver and I are both looking at this guy like he has two heads. He has to be joking. This trucker pays for his fuel at record speed and leaves never to be seen again. The local still insists it's Bigfoot. I just don't got in the woods cause I don't know. As a crew guy of an off-road racing team in Baja California, Mexico, I got to test drive some rigs and trucks. So technically truck driver. We were driving down south along Sea of Cortez with a buddy at night at this 4 hours dirt road to Gonzaga, which is pretty much in the middle of ducking nowhere in the desert. And we see the lights of a car behind coming down fast and now effectively tailing us, and the bastard had bar mount headlights on top, or what seemed like it, which are super bright. It's normal, always, that locals and gringos get wasted in the nearest, now former Duke of it, Spring Breaker town and then go down this road super fast to test their rigs since there's no police there. Cute, so I try waving him off to get the guide to keep them lights low since he's blinding us, but he isn't slowing down a bit nor turn his roof lights off, and it was a dangerous super dark road. Finally, near a curve near the shore, I found a spot to bail off the road without crashing, and we see lights passing by us super fast and going straight to the curve, and we were like, that's it. He is going to crash down to the sea, but the lights didn't fall and kept going straight into the beach and the sea, and then pitched up abruptly to the night sky and disappeared. We didn't say a word for a minute or so, and then my buddy goes, "Did you see it?" And I say, "The ducking flying truck." Didn't talk about any more, as simply it didn't make sense to talk about it or with anyone else when we arrived. The obligatory not a truck driver but a second-hand story I heard. My great uncle drove big trucks. Living in the middle of nowhere, sometimes people would leave trash on the road, and since he had a big truck he'd just smash into said boxes or paper and continue on. One day he was coming up on a cardboard box and just had the urge to swerve and miss this one. He misses it and passes by with no incident. Looks in his rear view to look at the box, and out pops a kindergarten age little kid that just heads back to their house as nothing happened. Driving through rural NM. Bisty area with the crazy melted rock look. No plants or anything. Just rock and sand. Monsoon time. Raining cats and dogs just pouring so hard you could barely see, going 20 miles per hour. Thunder and lightning just rocking the car. Sometimes turning into hail and pounding you. Just a nasty storm. Came around a corner, and the whole countryside legit on fire. Like 20 feet tall flames. Hundreds of yards in all directions while pouring rain at dusk. Just rocks and dirt wildly on fire in the pouring rain. Just slowly drove on. Was totally freaky and surreal. Honestly thought I may have hallucinated it. Check the news. Propane truck slid off the road going way too fast and apparently busted open pretty violently and lit on fire. Never saw the truck. Must have been behind something. Felt a bit bad after about not stopping. Years ago I read an answer on a thread with this question. About a guy who was riding with his truck driver father as a child. They were in the middle of nowhere and they were coming up on a person laying in the road with no one else around. No cars, etc. His dad blew the horn. They didn't move. He blew it again as he got closer. They didn't move. He told his son to put his head down and cover his eyes, and he ran the person over. When they looked back, a bunch of people who were previously hiding were running out of the woods, and the gist was that his dad knew it was a setup for a robbery or worse and wasn't chancing it with his child in the car. No clue if it was true or not, but I think about that story all the time. Driving through a national park in the middle of the night, going through a slow stretch at about 30 kilometers per hour. Every so often I think I see something out the window and beside me. Just a glimpse of movement. When I arc though I don't catch it. Finally on about the third time I whip my head around, and this time I recognize it's a huge black wolf following alongside my truck just off the highway. I only saw it for a few seconds before I had to focus back on the road, but it was absolutely lovely yet unsettling. Not a truck driver, but I have one weird story from when I was a kid. My parents always took us on long road trips every summer, and my dad liked to take meandering routes through rural towns to see all the tourist traps. One trip, we passed through a little town in Illinois, the kind you miss if you sneeze. This one had mannequins. Every house and business was only populated by mannequins. I don't remember seeing any people. Everything looked maintained and clean, so someone was at least caring for the place. There weren't any signs or anything indicating it was for tourists. Just a convenience store bait shop with a sign reading "Eat here, get worms." Edit. Thanks you Gamer Night Cat for doing the legwork to get to detailed answer. I've got a few. Being stalked by. My gut says a skinwalker outside of Cedar City, but I've told that one elsewhere on Reddit. One of the worst was when I was parked at a dirt turnout in the Arizona desert between Cameron and Page for the night. This is out in Navajo country, I believe. About 2 AM I woke up to scratching at the window of my sleeper. Went on for about 15 minutes. I'm sitting there in the dark scared to death, wondering what the duck's happening with my Bowie knife in my hand. After it ended I waited another 15 minutes or so before I opened my curtain and looked out the windows. Couldn't see anything outside and I was still the only one parked there. Got out the next morning and all I found were some footprints coming to the truck and eventually walking back into the desert. Haven't parked there since. I always stop at a small truck stop in Cameron now. I was in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Texas and getting so tired, and there were absolutely no lights anywhere around me but the stars. I guess I kinda messed up a turn at one of those forks in the road when a calm voice came loud over the CB. "Driver, Looks like it's time for you to pull over and grab some sleep. So I did. I'm not ignoring invisible citizen band Jesus. Edit. Wow, you all made my cake day amazing. That is my biggest upvote post. Yes. Maybe I am cool. My father's told me this story maybe 1,000 times. My family, as well as a couple of uncles and my oldest cousin, went on a trip from Mexico City to Acapulco when I was barely a year old. Back home in the middle of the night, the good old days when you could travel at night, the car broke down, and a police car quickly came to our help. There were 3 policemen in the car, and the chief offered to take my dad to the nearest gas station, where he could find a mechanic, and told the other 2 officers to stay with our car. My dad says they seem absolutely not pleased with the order, until the chief told them, don't worry, there's a woman and 2 children. That seemed to calm the 2 officers. Driving to the gas station on the police car, my dad asked the chief what was all that about. The chief told him that there had been many accidents in that part of the road, that's why they were able to find our car so quickly. All of the accidents involved young men traveling without female or child company. Those who had survived said that they crashed because they could see a very beautiful woman next to the road, but once they came close to her, she turned out to be just a rotting corpse staring at them, and they crashed because they were paralyzed by fear. I worked at the Nevada nuclear test site, decommissioning old buildings. How much time do you have, lol? One of the creepiest days was when I was sent with an end-dump load of non-hazmat material to the general landfill, which I had never been to before. Somehow I missed a turn and ended up at an armed gate with machine guns pointed at me. Very uncomfortable. Once I explained my mistake, I was quite hastily turned around. Still not knowing exactly where my turn was. A very nondescript desert road was what I was looking for. I headed back. I turned on the next dirt road I came to and ended up at the Sedan crater. Went and smoked a cigarette on the observation deck all by my lonesome. My hands were still shaking from the run-in with the armed guards. Another was when delivering a hazmat load to Area 25. They had begun using robots to guard the area. They were still in beta testing and someone may have just been ducking with me. But the damn thing perceived my truck as a threat and blocked my ability to move. I went inside the building and 15 minutes later it had moved on. My uncle was a long-haul trucker for almost 30 years. He did a lot of runs through Texas and said that some of the smaller towns gave him a weird vibe. Like he absolutely didn't belong there as an outsider and should just make his delivery and leave ASAP. My uncle was driving between Great Falls and Helena at around 3 AM. He had his high beams on as it was a lonely drive and quiet highway. In the distance he saw something cross the median and started to slow his approach, thinking it was a deer. As he got closer, he realized it was standing up and so he slowed down to about 30 miles per hour. He realized what it was and started to panic. A man in blue coveralls with a pig's head, not a mask, but literally the head of a pig on his shoulder. My uncle moved to the left lane and as he passed, pig head lunged at the truck. My uncle didn't stop to check if he'd grabbed until he was in the safety of Helena. Nothing was out of the ordinary there but on that stretch of road now. He doesn't slow down for anything. Edit. Great googly moogly. My first award. Thanks for all the love, guys. Truck driving. Many years ago I did that. Long hours. And always tired because the dispatcher always thought you were behind. But there were some good stories. This one guy when he saw another company truck at a rest stop and the driver was sleeping over the steering wheel. He would put on this gorilla mask he had and stand on the running board and knock on the window. Of course the driver invariably almost suffered a heart attack. And a couple even chased him around threatening great bodily harm. I was sitting in my truck one day waiting to load in a line of other trucks. One guy opens his door and stands on the running board like he is pissing off the side. Except he has this huge dildo in his hand. The next truck coming around the corner, the driver stared wide-eyed at this guy, who then proceeded to casually tap the huge D against the hot exhaust pipe as if he is shaking off a couple of piss drops. The other driver almost hit the building. Reno, NV, a place on the north side of town, way off the freeway towards an old military road. I got there early at like 1 AM. They didn't open till 6 AM. The facility was closed so no one around and I just pulled into the lot and parked off to the side. So I went to sleep and was woken shortly after to someone knocking on the door window. Firmly to the point the truck shook. I jump out of bed thinking they are there already and want to offload me early. I get to the door and no one is there. So I step down thinking they are behind the trailer looking at the door seal or something. No one around. I look under the truck and around, absolutely no one. No wind or bad weather. Not another person around. I jump in the truck and pull out of there as fast as I could and went and parked in a nearby truck stop. Still can't explain it. I mean, I guess I can justify I could have imagined the sound, but the truck shaking was definitely real, so I don't know. Not exactly creepy but definitely terrifying. My father was a truck driver and he was driving through a smaller town in Northern California hauling tomatoes. Suddenly he got incredibly tired, wasn't low on sleep or deprived at all, but ended up passing out at the wheel. Last thing he saw was the light of the town in front of him. He woke up about 2 hours later on the other side of town, perfectly parked on the side of the road. He swears something was looking out for him that night. Not me, but my mom told me a story about one late night out trucking. Her husband was sleeping in the back, and she was starting to get super tired and struggling to stay awake. She heard another trucker on the CB and started chatting with him. He helped her stay awake for the run until she stopped off at a truck stop until her husband could take over. That next morning, she told her husband what happened, and he told her the CB was broken, and that was impossible. Not me, but an ex-girlfriend's cousin's uncle. Yeah, I know it's a friend of a friend situation, but it was a well-known tale among the family. He was driving on a Mexican road at night. He felt a call of nature, so he parked on the sideway and jumped off the truck. He walked to relieve himself, and while doing that he felt a presence beside him. He pointed his flashlight at his side and saw, standing beside him, a small deformed person. It was naked and had both its head and face bloated, and he was standing just there. The driver, ex-GF's cousin's uncle, ran away to his truck, jumped in, and drove away from there. There's been a lot since I talked with my ex. We're cool but not too much in touch. But if you want to know more, I could ask her about the fuzzy details. A few years back I was driving home after a shift. It was 3 or 4 AM, and I was tired but not exhausted. It's a deserted state route in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty common not to see a single car during the 30-mile trip. I drive this road multiple times a week. It's mostly open fields and some farmland through this 30-mile stretch. This particular night it was cold, but the sky was clear, like no clouds or anything. And I actually love nights like this because you can see the stars so well without light pollution. Anyway, about halfway back home, I come over this hill to a 2 or 3 mile straight stretch. A huge, dark object about the length of a pickup truck, but far rounder and thicker, catches my attention as it's just hovering about 50 feet in the air, 50 or 60 feet off the road over a farm field. There's a very bright red light coming out of the side or bottom. I couldn't tell exactly where it originated from because it was so bright. As I was going about 50 miles per hour past it, I only had a few seconds to look at it, but the image is burned into my mind. I have no idea what it was. I wanted to turn around but I was kinda freaked out. I'm sure alien life exists somewhere, but as for visiting our planet, I don't know. But if I ever had to paint a picture of what I think a UFO could look like, I'd paint whatever the duck I saw that night. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything odd over that area since that night. I've been reading this thread for 20 minutes and it's 12:42 AM. I am so tired but I can't sleep. God damn this, it scares me. It's my lunch break and I log on to Reddit to have 38 notifications. We're all scared together. Parked off an exit ramp at about 3 AM for my 10 hours. The moon was full and high, and I spotted an unmistakably human figure in a nearby cut cornfield. A little spooky, but I just wrote it off as an old timer putting up a scarecrow for the grandkids. Started watching a few YouTube videos before turning in and out the corner of my vision eye, though I saw movement. I shut my lights off to get a good look. Saw the figure but nothing else. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like maybe it was in a different spot. Maybe a little closer even. I was definitely feeling a bit spooked. Highway was devoid of anyone besides a car passing every 10 minutes or so. I didn't want to, but I had to jump out to pee. I considered a bottle, but I told myself I was being childish. I took a look at the figure and it was right where I figured it should be. I hop out, walk between my truck and trailer and start leaking. Every fiber of my being wanted to look. I told myself again I was being foolish, but I couldn't help it. I looked out. The field was empty, the figure wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I pinched off and jumped back in. I took off down the highway. Didn't give one it about a violation. Stopped 40 minutes up the road at a well lit and very full loves. Haven't stopped on a ramp since.